Ella Fitzgerald woke up from surgery and looked down. The blanket covering her lower body lay flat where her legs should have been. Completely flat, no shape, no form, just emptiness under white hospital linen. She was 76 years old. She'd spent 60 years performing, dancing onto stages, moving with music. Her body had always been part of her artistry, the way she'd sway with a melody, gesture with her hands, move her feet to the rhythm. Now her feet were gone. Both legs amputated below the knee. Diabetes had finally taken what it had been threatening to take for years. Patricia Walsh stood at the foot of the bed, watching Ella process the reality. This was always the hardest moment, when a patient first saw what had been done to save their life. "Miss Fitzgerald, Doctor," Walsh said gently. "The surgery went well. We got all the necrotic tissue. You're going to survive this." Ella didn't respond, just kept staring at where her legs used to be. This is the story of what happened in the weeks after Ella Fitzgerald lost her legs, of the first time she sat in a wheelchair, of the moment cameras captured her facing the world with this new reality, and of the words she spoke that made everyone watching realize they were witnessing something far more profound than tragedy. The diabetes had been destroying Ella's body for decades. It started in the 1970s, slowly damaging blood vessels, compromising circulation, creating complications that accumulated year by year. First her eyesight, then kidney problems, then the circulation issues that led to this moment. By 1993, Ella's feet were dying. The blood flow to her lower legs had become so compromised. That tissue was literally necrotizing, turning black, dying while still attached to her body. The pain was constant and excruciating. Dr. Walsh had explained the options months earlier: aggressive vascular surgery to try to restore blood flow, or amputation. They'd tried the surgery multiple times, but the diabetes was too advanced, the damage too severe. "If we don't amputate," Dr. Walsh had finally said, "the necrosis will spread. It will become septic. You'll die from infection." Ella had nodded, understanding. Both legs, I'm sorry." Now, 3 days post-surgery, Ella lay in her hospital bed at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, facing a reality she'd known was coming but couldn't truly prepare for. She'd never walk again, never stand on stage the way she had for 60 years, never dance. Assistant Virginia Williams had been with Ella for 20 years. She'd seen her through health crises before, but nothing like this. When she visited that first day after surgery, she didn't know what to say. "Hey, Virginia," Ella said, her voice weak but attempting humor. "I'm a little shorter now." Virginia started crying, couldn't help it. The sight of Ella in that hospital bed, diminished, altered, facing such profound loss, it was overwhelming. "Don't cry," Ella said. "I'm the one who should be crying. You've still got your legs." It was classic Ella, trying to make others comfortable even in her own crisis. But Virginia could see the fear behind the joke, the uncertainty about what came next. The physical recovery from amputation was brutal. Phantom limb pain, the sensation of legs that no longer existed hurting. Constantly learning to balance without legs, the indignity of complete dependence for basic functions. At 76, adapting to such radical change felt nearly impossible. But the psychological adjustment was harder. Ella had always been a performer, and performers are defined by their physical presence. How they command a stage, how they move, how they inhabit space. Who was Ella Fitzgerald without the ability to walk onto a stage? 2 weeks after surgery, the rehabilitation team brought in a wheelchair. Not a hospital wheelchair, a custom one, fitted to Ella's specific measurements and needs. Bright red, because Virginia had insisted on something that looked less medical. "This is what we're working with now," said Marcus Johnson, the physical therapist assigned to Ella's case. "I know it's not what you wanted, but we're going to teach you how to navigate the world with this." Ella stared at the wheelchair like it was a betrayal, a symbol of everything she'd lost. "I spent 60 years standing on stages," she said quietly. "Now I sit, now you roll," Marcus corrected gently. "There's a difference between sitting and rolling. Sitting is passive, rolling is movement. It's still you deciding where to go." The first time Ella transferred from the hospital bed to the wheelchair was terrifying. She had to rely entirely on upper body strength she'd never needed to develop. Marcus and a nurse supported her, but the fear of falling, of being helpless, was overwhelming. She made it into the chair, sat there, breathing heavily from the exertion, looking down at the footrest where her feet should have been. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked. "Like I'm not myself," Ella admitted. "You're still yourself. You're just yourself in a different configuration." Over the next 3 weeks, Ella learned to navigate in the wheelchair, how to propel herself, how to maneuver through doorways, how to transfer to and from bed. The loss of independence was crushing, needing help with tasks she'd done automatically her entire life, but slowly, grudgingly, she adapted, because the alternative was giving up entirely, and that wasn't in Ella's nature. Her manager, Richard Rosenthal, visited frequently. He'd been managing Ella's career since the 1980s, had watched diabetes slowly limit what she could do, but this felt final in a way previous health crises hadn't. The press is asking for a statement, Richard said carefully during one visit, about your health, about the surgery. They want to know how you're doing. Tell them I'm fine, Ella said automatically. Ella, they know it's serious. There are rumors, some accurate, some not. Maybe it's time to address this directly. Ella was quiet for a long time. What do they want? Pictures of me in this chair, proof that Ella Fitzgerald is broken. They want to know you're okay. Your fans are worried. I don't know if I'm okay, Ella admitted. I don't know what I am anymore. Richard made a decision. What if we controlled the narrative? One interview, one photographer. You decide what gets said and shown. At least then the truth comes from you rather than speculation. Ella considered it. The idea of being photographed in a wheelchair, of the world seeing her diminished, it felt exposing, humiliating, but Richard was right that silence would create worse speculation. Okay, she said finally. One interview, but I choose when I'm ready. 6 weeks after surgery, Ella agreed to the interview. A journalist named Susan Mitchell from a major music magazine known for respectful, thoughtful coverage. One photographer, David Chen, who'd photographed Ella many times over the years and knew how to be unobtrusive. They came to Ella's home in Beverly Hills, where she'd been living since being discharged from the hospital. Virginia had arranged everything, ensured the house was wheelchair accessible, brought in equipment Ella needed, created an environment where she could navigate independently. Ella sat in her wheelchair in the living room, sunlight coming through the windows. She dressed carefully, elegant blouse, jewelry, makeup, wanted to look like herself, or as close as possible. Who she used to be. Susan Mitchell sat across from her, camera crew setting up. David Chen positioned himself to the side, waiting for the right moments. Miss Fitzgerald, thank you for doing this, Susan said. I know this isn't easy. Nothing's easy anymore, Ella said, attempting a smile. But we're doing it anyway. How are you feeling? It was the question everyone asked. The question Ella had been avoiding answering honestly even to herself. She looked down at the wheelchair, at the empty space where her legs should have been, at 76 years of life that had brought her to this moment. Then she looked back at Susan Mitchell and said something that surprised everyone, including herself. I'm sad about my legs, Ella said. Her voice was steady, clear. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. I danced on 2 stages for 60 years. I'll never do that again. That's a loss, a real loss, and I'm allowed to grieve it. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But here's what I realized lying in that hospital bed. I didn't lose my voice. Diabetes took my eyesight. It took my legs. But it didn't take the one thing that made me who I am. I can still sing. Susan leaned forward. Are you saying you want to perform again? I don't know about perform, Ella said. I don't know if I can handle stages anymore, the logistics of it all. But singing, making music, that was never about my legs. It was always about my voice, and my voice is still here. David Chen was taking photos throughout this exchange, capturing Ella's face as she spoke, the determination mixed with sadness, the refusal to be defined solely by loss. What do you want people to know? Susan asked. Ella thought carefully before responding. I want them to know that getting old is hard, getting sick is hard, losing parts of yourself, literally in my case, is hard. I'm not going to pretend it's not. I'm not going to smile and say everything's fine when I'm sitting in a wheelchair at 76 without my legs. She paused again, then continued. But I also want them to know that hard doesn't mean over. I'm still Ella. I'm still the girl who won amateur night at the Apollo. I'm still the woman who sang with all the greats. I'm still here, just shorter now. The joke landed. Susan smiled despite the heavy subject matter. David captured the moment, Ella making a joke about her own tragedy, choosing humor over self-pity. I spent 60 years standing, Ella continued. Maybe it's okay to spend whatever time I have left sitting. Doesn't make the music any less real. The interview continued for another 30 minutes. Ella talked about her career, her regrets, her gratitude. She was honest about the pain, physical and emotional, didn't minimize the difficulty of her situation, but she also refused to be pitied. When the interview ended, Susan Mitchell had tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said, for being so honest, so real. What else am I going to be? Ella said. Fake doesn't suit me. The article ran 2 weeks later. The cover photo was striking, Ella in her wheelchair looking directly at the camera with an expression that was simultaneously vulnerable and defiant. The headline, Ella Fitzgerald still here, still singing. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from fans, from people dealing with amputations, from elderly people facing their own physical decline, from anyone who'd ever felt diminished by circumstances beyond their control. One letter came from a woman who'd lost both legs in a car accident. I've been in a wheelchair for 5 years and still felt ashamed, she wrote. Seeing Ella Fitzgerald, Ella Fitzgerald, in a wheelchair and not apologizing for it changed something in me. If she can face the world like this, maybe I can too. That's what the interview did, not erase Ella's loss or make it less painful, but refuse to let the loss be the only story. Ella acknowledged grief while also insisting on her continued value and presence. She lived 3 more years after that interview, never performed publicly again. The logistics were too difficult, her health too compromised, but she did sing. Occasionally, for friends, for visitors, proving to herself that the voice was still there, still capable of beauty. In June 1996, Ella Fitzgerald died of complications from diabetes. She was 79 years old. The obituaries celebrated her as one of the greatest vocalists of the 20th century, but many also mentioned that final interview, the grace with which she'd faced devastating loss. David Chen's photographs from that interview became iconic. Museums requested them for exhibitions about disability and artistry. Medical schools used them to teach about patient dignity. They showed something rarely captured, a beloved public figure being honest about physical decline without surrendering to it. Virginia Williams kept a copy of that magazine cover in her office for the rest of her life. That's the Ella I want people to remember. She'd say, not the girl at the Apollo, not the glamorous performer, but the 76-year-old woman in a wheelchair who looked at the camera and said, I'm still here. That took more courage than anything she did on stage. The interview transcript was later donated to the Smithsonian. Researchers studying aging, disability, and public figures found it invaluable, a rare document of someone famous being genuinely honest about physical limitation. But the real legacy of that interview wasn't historical or academic. It was personal. Thousands of people facing their own physical declines heard Ella's words and found permission to grieve their losses while still asserting their value. Hard doesn't mean over. That became the line people quoted, the reminder they needed when their own bodies betrayed them, when age or illness or accident took abilities they'd relied on their entire lives. Ella Fitzgerald lost her legs at 76. It was tragic, painful, a devastating blow to someone who'd spent her life in motion. She grieved that loss openly, didn't pretend it didn't matter, but she also refused to let that loss be the final word, insisted that value transcended physical capability, that she was still herself, still worthy, still here, just in a different configuration. That first interview in a wheelchair could have been about pity, about tragic decline, about a legend diminished. Instead, it became about resilience, about honest grief coexisting with continued purpose, about choosing to show up even when showing up looked different than it used to. Ella sat in that wheelchair, looked at the camera, and taught millions of people that you can acknowledge loss without being defined by it. That crying about what you've lost and celebrating what remains aren't contradictory. They're both true simultaneously. The legs were gone, the voice remained. And in choosing to honor both truths, the grief and the gratitude, Ella Fitzgerald gave one final performance that might have been her most important.